We're ready to get started. Potluck Sundays being what they are, you know, it used to be that everybody was putting the finishing touches on their fried chicken at home or something. Now they're just running late to Albertsons to pick up their fried chicken. But either way, it everybody runs a few minutes late on Potluck Sundays, so we won't be bothered if people walk in without notes in hand or being prepared, a little flustered or whatever. So that's okay. So we're in Daniel chapter 2. We talked about Daniel's resolve, right? And that's the proper description for what Daniel did. He was acting according to his conscience. He was not making an attempt to keep every facet of the law, but his conscience determined that even outside the land it would be beneficial for him to not partake of the unclean food, the unclean table items. And so the Lord blessed that. He saw favor from the Lord in that. And he's the only person in the world who gained weight on veganism in 10 days, right? So it had to be a miracle. Here, you know, if I was limited to a total vegan diet, I would lose weight very rapidly because I just wouldn't eat. I would just find out how long you can live on oxygen and water. Because I don't love vegetables on their own that much. You know, when you get a sizzling plate of fajitas, I like those peppers and onions. You know why? They taste like meat. So, you know, all the vegetables on that grill, right? So Daniel did that, and he received favor from the Lord. And at the very end of that passage, right, he was examined by King Nebuchadnezzar. King talked with them directly. Now, you get this picture of King Nebuchadnezzar as if he's this majestic king, big beard. I mean, all we see is there are likenesses of him. Remember that he's actually not even 30 yet in chapter 1. If you go look at Nebuchadnezzar's birthday, he's a young man. So, that is something to keep in mind as we go here. But he examined these younger men. I mean, honestly, they couldn't have been that much younger than he was at this time. And found them to be, it says 10 times better, right, than everybody else. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all of his realm. So, Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. That's kind of you see this in the prophets and other parts of other books where they give a summary statement to how this context happened, how these people came into the positions that they are in, and essentially the overview of what took place. And so Daniel's giving us the beginning and the end, and now he'll go on to give us some details. So here we are, the king's forgotten dream. Those of you who know Daniel's story will be familiar with this. But we will begin by reading a few of these verses. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, meaning that they were recurring. And his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, "I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream." Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. And I'll just make a note here that from this point, this very word until the end of chapter 7, basically, it's in Aramaic in the original text. We talked about that in our introductory material. But Daniel makes it clear, this was in Aramaic, these Chaldeans. "O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation." I'd like to make a note there. I don't know why that came into practice. "O king, live forever." The Brits say long live, right? That's reasonable, right? They have one of those long live the queens right now. That's great, no problem. But what kind of king is stupid enough to take that as a compliment? "O king, live forever." Right? Philip of Macedon paid a slave in his court. Didn't pay the slaves, but I mean, he assigned a slave in his court to tell him every day, "Philip, you will die." Much smarter man than to get flattered by this guy. "Oh, king, snivel, snivel, live forever." That's not going to help. Anyway, sorry. That's free. King replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. My word is iron," and other we might say. "If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your house will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation." So he has troubling dreams. Maybe not one night, right? Do you remember your dreams? Sometimes. I very rarely do these days. When I was a kid, I can still remember the dreams that scared the snot out of me when I was a kid, right? I don't know why I still remember those. But I get vague impressions of being unsettled by dreams or by things. Pastors have different nightmares than y'all do, you know. I won't go into detail. We have different nightmares than most normal people, right? But vague impressions of sweat on my pillow when I wake up, those kinds of things. If I just have one of those, that doesn't bother me, right? But Nebuchadnezzar, he had dreams. He could have passed off one as being, you know, the stuff he was eating off the table that Daniel wouldn't eat. Doing funny things with his digestion. But he has dreams. It's a repeated experience, right? And so he calls everybody in. All of the, what does he say, the magicians, the conjurers. If we were to put this in the Harry Potter universe, you know, they got the professor of the dark arts. They've got the master of potions. They've got this guy over here. You know, sorry, y'all. Everybody reads Harry Potter now. It's okay, not a surprise. But not much better than that, right? Actually, as far as their actual power that they have. He calls in everybody. Magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, at least the representative, at least those who are within summoning range here, in the middle of the night maybe. They came in and stood before the king. So he didn't ask just one. Now who's absent? This is notable. If you know the story, we haven't read that verse, but who's not named here? Daniel. What do we know about Daniel? And Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. What do we know about them? They're way better than everybody else. You don't need to call in the all-American crowd here, the all-American team here. You need to call Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Belteshazzar, however, where you want to put the accent there. But they're not called because they're not there. We find that out in a little bit. But Nebuchadnezzar takes this dream seriously, these dreams. Things are of great importance. So he's not going to settle for one interpreter, one person doing it. He was anxious to understand it. He says, I had a dream and my spirit is anxious to know or to understand the dream, to be aware of its intimate details and its meaning. Again, they understood that they had a rubric for understanding when a dream had meaning, right? So the Chaldeans answer and they said that, you know, if we're told the dream, this is reasonable, right? By now, this is the second year of his reign. He was about 29, Nebuchadnezzar was, when he became king of Babylon, if I'm doing my math right, which is questionable. I said about, right? We don't know his birth date. We know his birth year. So he's something in the 30 to 32 range by this point. Can you imagine that, by the way? Daniel, you've been made the king of kings, and every animal, every child, everybody is under your influence, and you're 28 to 32 years old. He wasn't as young as it gets, but being the king of Babylon was a big deal. And he took the responsibility apparently seriously. I mean, this is a big thing. I mean, we don't even let somebody be the president of the United States till they're 34, right? I think that's right. Is that right? 34? Yeah. Just imagine your barista at your local coffee shop, who's now usually 34, being the president of the United States. Might be better than some options that are running for a particular party still, but who knows? King said to them, I had a dream. My spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Tell us. Tell the dream, and we will declare the interpretation. Now, parents, you know that occasionally you have tried to hold your children accountable for something you never told them, right? Happens. All parents do it. Every parent does it. Grandparents do it less, perhaps, because they learned by being stupid for many years beforehand. It's just how it is. You grow up, right? You're too tired to have kids, but you know all about them, right? At that point, as grandparents. But I have done this. I have done this to my children. I'm not going to ask them for all of the times that I have done it, because I know that especially these two remember everything. They will remember everything. Everything. It's like, when we read about the chronicles or the record of a king's tenure, right? Come in and read this to me, like in the story of Joseph, right? And they have every little detail recorded. I have that running around in duplicate in my whole life. But that seems like what they're doing, right? You shouldn't do that. Hold people accountable for something you haven't told them. But the king of Babylon has a strategy here. Nebuchadnezzar, I don't know which is shorter to say, Nebuchadnezzar or the king of Babylon. I don't know. I haven't counted the letters. Nebuchadnezzar, we should call him like one of my professors did, King Nebo or something, like give him a nickname. Now, he's asking them, I want your collective wisdom applied to this, and I want you to tell me what the dream was. And there's some disagreement about whether Nebuchadnezzar remembered the details of the dream. Some people think that he did, and he was simply applying this as a test. I could see an argument that maybe he had a vague impression of doom of this dream, and he would recognize it if it were repeated to him. But he may not understand all the details, so he wants that. I'm not going to make a determination. You can make up your own minds. You are applying your minds to this, right? Whether it's me or Chuck Swindoll or Charles Stanley or you name your favorite teacher up here. You do have your Bibles open, your brains engaged, right? And you're submitting to the Holy Spirit. And like y'all pray that the Lord would bless your time in the Word before you come to church, right? Because if you're not doing that, you ought to start doing that. Because we're humans, right? We can make mistakes. I did make one once. I'm sure of it. Y'all laughed that time. You didn't laugh last time I told that to you. No, but we do make mistakes. But this isn't mission critical, whether he's testing them or not. Chris, did you get some notes? Hey, good. This isn't mission critical. That's not a mission critical thing. Here's the scenario. Tell me the dream. Tell me the interpretation. And you will be blessed beyond your wildest dreams, rather than being torn limb from limb, like a Wookiee who loses a board game. Star Wars reference. Yeah. What? Usually animals. Draft animals, yeah. That was a nasty process, yeah. Like the rack in the medieval term in the time, except a little more acute. Yeah. Probably preferable to the rack, actually. Anyway, see what I mean? They're weird kids. They're mine, I can say that. No, they think of questions, right? So, he considered it to be a very significant dream. And so, for reliability's sake, he needs to know that the people who are interpreting it are actually powerful, right? Not just blowing smoke, not just creating a facsimile, not just studying previous dreams and previous royal records that existed and just kind of exegeting whatever and piecing together things. He needs to know you are actually powerful and actually capable of doing this. And actually, he puts risk. He inserts skin in the game. He says, you guys are going to do this, and if you can't do it, there are consequences. You will be blessed tremendously if you do it. But if you try to pull one over on me, you're going to die. I actually don't think that's that unreasonable in that situation. They could create a serious problem here. You remember, perhaps, if you were here for our character study in the life of David, which is, we paused, when Saul goes to the witch at Endor, right? I don't know what he expected to find. He did not expect to have Samuel actually show up, I don't think, right? There's a lot of risk when the king seeks out information from the wrong places. He gets the wrong information for a whole empire. Not bad for a guy who's, 29, 30, 31, king here. Because these are his advisors. I mean, maybe not all of his advisors. If you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. If you fail to do that, it's going to be ugly. They answered the second time. Said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command for me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Skippy. Right? They think he's just got a big head. You're barely shaving, Nebuchadnezzar. We know your beard is fake. Don't you know that no king in their right mind has ever asked this kind of stupidity from his magicians, his conjurers, and his Chaldeans? This is stupid. And you're going to kill us over it. I mean, this is a heated exchange, as heated as you dare be, with the king of the Babylonian Empire, I imagine. But what are you risking, right? If you fail to persuade him, you're still going to get torn limb from limb because you've got the Babylonian insignia. I work for Babylon on. You got the badge. There's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king. Out of the mouths of pagans, right? There's not a man on earth who could do that. There certainly isn't. Moreover, this thing which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare it to the kings except God's, whose dwelling place is not with flesh. It's truth, right? No one except a God who has a different vantage point than we do. Now, they're pagans, right? We're going to talk about this in the service, what a pagan is. A pagan, by definition, is a polytheist. They're pagans, but they understand that nobody with the limitations of human flesh can accomplish this. You're going to have to go elsewhere, and how that's going to happen, we don't know. But you can't expect this of us. The king becomes enraged. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Risky business working for the man, isn't it? I mean, he turns on you like that. Now, listen, I do think that Nebuchadnezzar is not at the height of his wisdom in making this. And I think it's important to understand that he has a long life ahead of him and has not developed even the human level of wisdom that he will be developed in him. This is foolish. I could name 1,000 decisions that I have seen churches make that were throwing the baby out with the bathwater like this. They do. Doctrinally, practically, in their ministry philosophy, fine. I don't think this is a wise decision, but it is the decision. And the unwise decision of an absolute monarch is still the decision, right? He became furious. You actually can't afford to be furious as an absolute monarch, right? It doesn't work well. You have to... What do we know about the anger of man? It doesn't achieve the righteousness of God. It doesn't do that for anybody. Anybody. You make decisions in anger, you make foolish decisions. I know because I made one once. Right? That may be the same one though, Ernie. That may be the same one. Don't get extended here now. Don't heap coals on me now. All right. Yeah, that's two. So, but it could be the same one. But I can't recall it all. I'm just sure that it happened. No. The decree went forth, the wise men should be slain. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. That's how Daniel and his buddies aren't there. And that's the other thing that I don't understand about Nebuchadnezzar. He had personally interviewed them, decided that they were 10 times better in all ways. They were better looking, they were handsomer, they were more articulate, they were more knowledgeable. And in addition, Daniel tells us Daniel had this cool ability to tell them about dreams. That's why he gets called a seer and not a prophet in the Old Testament text. So he has this ability to tell them exactly what he wants to know, and he sends an assassin to his front door. Yeah, Bill. Yeah, baby out with the bathwater. I do believe that there's an element of this that he distrusts the collective knowledge and the collective abilities of these men. You do not need, by extension, you don't need a committee if you have real wise men. You don't need them piled on top of each other. You need somebody like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah together, perhaps, that collective, with real power, real knowledge. They looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Verse 14, then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch. Who prevails in a heated confrontation? We say the guy who gets angry last. Perhaps a cool head. Somebody who doesn't lose it. Very pragmatic. Young men, old men, all the men, particularly, women too. He replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is this decree from the king so urgent? Why is he flying off the handle? Why are both his knees jerking? Why is this happening like this? Why is this such a big deal? And Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. You're guilty by association, Daniel. And it's going to cost you your life. You're 10 times better than they are, but nobody cares in this situation. The decree covers you too. And again, we have a situation in which the people are saying, look, it doesn't matter how good you are. You're going to have this happen to you. So with Daniel, discretion, discernment, all of these things are applicable in his life. It says Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time. What do you think happened when Daniel walked into the room? King Nebuchadnezzar. I think maybe that jogged his memory. Oh, there's this guy that's 10 times better than all these other guys who are lying dogs. Now that might mean that he's 10 times better at lying than the other guys is. It might mean that he's 10 times better to my benefit. Yeah, Becky. It's political. No. You think there were politics going on in King Nebuchadnezzar's court? Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I'll tell you a little story. See, when I go around to a conference and I hang around a bunch of reverends, because you know that I do that, right? I go 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 in a year if they ask me to speak. I go to a conference, I'm around a bunch of reverends, and I dress something like this. I usually cover my gun up because I don't want them to all have heart attacks. But I go to the conferences and they look at me and go, well, the tractor's out back with the dumpster. You want to go help? I mean, like, they think I'm the help. Now, folks, there are people that are smarter than me, but I'm no dummy. And I'm trained reasonably well. But due to my youth or whatever, or the assumption of my youth, even in seminary, the average entering age when I entered Dallas Seminary was 34. I went in at 22. we were all at the same life stage. Everybody still had their babies in the strollers. Everybody still had everything. You know, we all had kids the same age. We were the same. It's just I hadn't spent 10 years at an office before I went to seminary. It used to be far more common. So I get used to this. I think that may have been what happened to Daniel, Becky, is that he did look young. And he probably was better than they were. And in a political environment, guess what happens? You get snubbed, blackballed, you get put out. Now, what happened in this situation is that was a death sentence for everybody that put Daniel out, in my opinion. I think that's reasonable. I think that's right. But that doesn't exempt Daniel and his buddies from the nature of the command. The fact that he wasn't there, they put him out. Because what are they going to do now? Go to Nebuchadnezzar. Hold on. Our political process blackballed this guy. He wasn't invited to the party, but he has the answer. They're going to die anyway, right? So it's win-lose, there's no draw. Now that they can't do it, they're stuck. They made an unwise, foolish decision by the wise men. So Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, "For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. So then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. That word compassion, favor, grace, we might say, one of the words that gets talked about and translated as grace. He's looking for favor. He knows that God is not obligated to use him in the way that he's requesting. You ever get into argument with God about how he's going to use you? I never did. Problematic, right? You don't go to God and say, "This is how you're going to use me." You don't tell God that. Daniel has been placed there. He has done some good work for a couple of years. That's as long as he's been here in Babylon. You may presume that the Lord has a particularly successful trajectory for your life, and he's going to use you in certain ways that he's not obligated to do. But they go and request. They're going to go petition the God of heaven, which is a very common reference to the God of Israel here in Daniel, so that they would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. I grew up in a church environment where that would be a selfish prayer request. They wouldn't like that prayer request. They don't like it. You're supposed to always ask God to glorify himself in your life, to glorify himself in everything. You didn't want to get specific. Well, I have a friend, Ed Underwood. Do you know the name Ed Underwood? He was the pastor for many years, for a number of years at the Church of the Open Door. And I recently met him. And he has 42 different chronic illnesses that could kill him. And he said, I went to the hospital, and everybody came in and prayed for God's glory and that God's will would be done. And I said, get out of here. I want you to pray that I get better. We don't have to apologize for that. This is what I want. Now, it may be audacious, right? But that's the characteristic of earnest prayer is audacity. You don't treat God like he's at arm's length when you pray to him. You pray to him as if he's your father that seeks your best interest and loves you dearly. You ask him for what you want. If it's bad for you, he won't give it to you. It's okay. He's a good father. So they pray. They have a small prayer meeting. Remember, most likely these guys were not eligible for temple worship any longer. They didn't have access to the temple. This is the Old Testament, right? To be in God's presence, a lot of people would say that they had to be in the temple, but they come into his presence here through prayer together. They didn't light any fires, light any incense, cut themselves anything, do anything else. It says in verse 19, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Dream, perhaps we would call it night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. But Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So he prays this. Now, occasionally, we ask, I make a misstep, and I ask somebody that I don't know if they want to pray. And I ask them, would you like to pray for us? Would you like to close us in prayer? And they go, you might have felt that way in your life. Even if you don't feel like that now, you may have felt like that before. I believe this is a song. It's actually typeset as a song in our English translations usually, but it is also a prayer. And you may wonder how some of these guys can like compose these songs on the fly, right? Part of it is that their culture is different, right? If you go and you study Hebrew from its earliest roots, you realize that the language is more of a help. And especially in its earliest stages, it's more of a help for an oral tradition. Like their memories were still drastically greater than ours. It lacks some of the precision that would come along in more modern languages, just in its syntax, just in the way it's put together. And so they developed the capacity, right, to improvise. Theologically like that, not improvise, but improvise the structure more than we do. They thought, I don't want to make light of this, but remember in the great canonical work, The Princess Bride, canonical being Western civilization. You ever watched The Princess Bride? Right, at the very beginning of The Princess Bride, what does Andre the Giant's character do? He can't help himself. He rhymes everything. Stop it now, I mean it. Anybody want a peanut? Like he sat there. It's like a little kid that learns how to whistle. I can whistle a concerto for you right now because I spent many, many hours of my youth sitting in the back of my dad's truck. Ever heard a little kid try to whistle? And then the first time they whistle, they're actually sucking air in and they have no idea how they did it, right? See, in their culture, they had more of an oral focus on their tradition, and it kind of just was a more fluid thing for them. On the flip side, they also were very, very instructed, very, very knowledgeable about the truths of Scripture. And so on occasion, somebody has asked me when I've asked them to pray, and they go, hold their arms up like this, their body language gets real intense. Afterwards, I just don't know how. Read some more. Learn some more about who God is. That'll help. Recently, my wife texted me during the week because we homeschool our kids. Well, basically, Priscilla homeschools the kids, and I spank them. That's my homeschooling contribution. I discipline them. I do teach them on occasion. I do help, and we joke about being in Josh Meyer's Immersion Academy for this or that. But over the years that we've homeschooled, that has been the normal division of labor for our little homeschool. But she texts me, and she says, I don't know what I should do. Isaac is reading. But he hasn't done his math or his history or whatever. Well, let me tell you, that's a massive answer to prayer for us because we want Isaac to love reading rather than getting out the cat of nine tails and make him read. I said, don't stop him. Everything else in your education, math included, you open a math book, what's in there? Words. The language of math makes no sense without another language to explain what you're supposed to do and what those symbols mean. Everything in your education, to this day, young people, old people, and not either people, depends on reading. If you want to get better, you want to learn more, you want to be better than you were yesterday, make wiser decisions than you've made for the whole previous part of your life, you need to read more. You know what you need to read more? More of this. Your spiritual growth depends on reading this yourself, right? And it helps you. Actually, it's a very small part of your spiritual life that will allow you to pray in front of other people, but your prayers will benefit from the theology that you take in this way. So he is times and the epochs. He says he says, God, you're the source of all wisdom and all power. Everybody who has wisdom, everybody who has power, he gets it from you, whether they know it or not. It's he who changes the times. That my updated NASB here says epoch. Some of them say seasons, the shifting of the times. You're sovereign over those things. How does he do that, by the way? Do we see God in Scripture normally saying, okay, now it's time for spring? In El Paso, he did that on December 29th, by the way. He said, it's time for spring, because I was doing bee cutouts 9 days later at the zoo, and that shouldn't be possible. There should not be baby bees in that colony on January 10th or whatever it was, January 8th. Shouldn't happen. Is God sovereign over those things? Absolutely. How is he sovereign over them, though? Can he change them at any time? Sure he can. You want an ice age? Bam. An ice age. You want sunspot activity to cease and we get another Maunder minimum, another mini ice age, which I think is far more likely than the hairspray from the 80s cooking us all to death? I don't know. God doesn't sit there. He created creation, right? He created orbits. He created celestial bodies that move in a rotation, right? Yes, he's sovereign over it. Yes, he could stick his finger out and stop the whole thing at any time if he wanted. He can do that with an individual's life. Oh, you were going to die, Hezekiah. Oh, now you get 50 more years. All up to him. If he needs a longer day for Israel to have victory over their enemies, he can do that. He can say, hey, Moses, flap your arms, and you're going to prevail. Oh, Moses, get those arms up. Get those arms up. Get your buddies to hold your arms up. He can do what he wants. But we shouldn't understand sovereignty to be something that the text doesn't say. And actually, sovereignty is a theological description of what the text says. So we need to be careful with that. My point is this. It's parallel to the second concept, and this is the one that we get to. He removes kings and establishes kings. He removes kings and establishes kings. How does he normally do that? Bloody revolution. Aren't y'all students of history? Assassinations. Their sons kill them. Their cousins kill them. Their wife kills them. That's why the kings do it first usually, right? To prevent that kind of thing from happening. Now, does God particularly choose a man, David, over Israel? Sure, that's his chosen nation. Does he choose to cause Jehoiakim a heck of a lot of problems with Nebuchadnezzar? Right? Yeah, sure he does. But we should not go so far as to blame all of our stupid electorate's decision for electing a president on God choosing him. Will God use him? Yeah. God will. He will work all things together for the good of those who love him. Remember, love is not the same as trust him, believe him, receive eternal life. A believer may be a justified person. He may go to heaven when he dies. He may not love the Lord his whole life. For he may not experience some of that goodness because he will be under discipline. He works together for the good of those who love him. It's a condition. All that is to say is that years ago, I sat in a room with people that were crying when Big O got elected, right? And Obama. And then they comforted themselves by saying, we know he's your choice, Lord. Don't blame the stupidity of the human electorate in the United States. And I'll be honest, it was stupid. And we may make another stupid decision. Who's leading in the Democratic primaries right now? Yeah. Well, I mean, he's not as good looking as Joseph Stalin, but I mean, he's not far off. Will the Lord work in spite of those things? Is he sovereign? Could he have done that? But you have no basis to say that he does that for every nation. Daniel's context is, the reason he's in Nebuchadnezzar's court is because the Lord is sovereign over those two nations, and he did choose to discipline his chosen nation with this one. And I think that's the context in what he's saying there. All right. That makes sense. Y'all don't have to agree with me on that. But this issue of what God's sovereignty entails, as far as the examples, we're not entitled to disagree with the Bible on what sovereignty means, but you could disagree with my illustrations of it, right? God's sovereignty is a much broader thing than what most theological traditions give it. So, he who changes the times, the seasons, he removes kings and establishes kings. He's put Nebuchadnezzar here, even though he's 30 and making a foolish, arrogant, knee-jerk decision right now. He has done that. He gives wisdom to wise men, knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. So if you want to have understanding, you've got to go to God to get it. Don't care if you're Nebuchadnezzar. Don't care if you're a magician, a conjurer, a Chaldean. All of your knowledge, if it is true knowledge, comes from the Almighty God of heaven. All of it. And if it doesn't, it's not truth. It's not understanding. It's not knowledge. Because he's the one who knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. Oh, we're out of minutes. We started 9:32 a.m. sharp, folks. I made my promise. I'm keeping this promise. We're going to take 2 minutes now. So I get 45 minutes no matter what. Any questions, comments, snide remarks, accusations of heresy? Accusation of heresy right here. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So the first one, I'm sure it says the
Yeah.
second year of his reign.
Yeah.
So when Daniel and his friends came to, so they were still making him training?
Yes. Remember that when...
Maybe that's why he wasn't called first? Because they were...
It's possible. That's possible. It seems like he would not have fallen victim to the decree if he wasn't yet considered a wise man, because they went out and found him because he was a wise man. So I'm not sure about that. However, remember, there is some ambiguity to our understanding of when Nebuchadnezzar was crowned as king, because he was actually on campaign when his father died. He had to leave the campaign and go back. So he was functionally, probably acting as what we would call a regent in many ways before that. But anyway, so there's some ambiguity. And we talked about that in terms of higher criticism. When people come to Daniel and start arguing with the dates, saying, well, he wasn't the king then, he wasn't the king here, he wasn't the king there, whatever. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Snide remarks? All right. If you have any that come to mind, I am completely and totally connected at all times in ways that I could not have imagined 10 years ago. So just send me your questions, comments, or even your snide remarks. All right, let's pray. We're ready to get started. Potluck Sundays being what they are, you know, it used to be that everybody was putting the finishing touches on their fried chicken at home or something. And now they're just running late to Albertsons to pick up their fried chicken. But either way,